Hey everybody, welcome to Crypt Finder. In my last video, I talked about Midnight Offerings from 1981, and I thought, why don't we back it up a couple years and talk about another made-for-TV movie that at least I think is a clear inspiration for Midnight Offerings, because it deals with sort of teenage rivalry and also the witchcraft theme, and it was directed by an up-and-coming director named Wes Craven. The movie is Stranger in Our House from 1978. This is sometimes called Summer of Fear, and I think that's probably just because that's the name of the book title that was published in 1976 by Lois Duncan. Now, I don't want to drive us too far off the main highway down a side road, but I do have to mention Lois Duncan was a prolific young adult writer. She helmed such things as I Know What You Did Last Summer, which was, of course, made into a film first in 1997. Then you had a sequel called I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, and now we have a new version in 2025 that's sort of a remake, sort of a sequel. Duncan also wrote Killing Mr. Griffin, which was adapted into a made-for-TV movie in 1997 that starred Jay Thomas, Amy Jo Johnson, Mario Lopez, and Scott Bairstow. And she also wrote Down a Dark Hall, Stranger with My Face, Don't Look Behind You, and many more. The murder of her daughter, Caitlin Arquette, in 1989 was a devastating blow, as you can certainly imagine, and she ended up actually writing a book about the ongoing investigation and the case entitled Who Killed My Daughter that came out in 1992. My guess is that Lois Duncan, I never knew her, of course, so this is totally my opinion, but I just think that like some of the darker suspense stories and sometimes outright horror novels, I just don't think she had it in her to continue writing those after such a horrific event actually happened to her personally. And so she kind of stepped away from that in her later years. She ended up doing a lot of chapter books and children's picture books. The killer of her 18-year-old daughter was actually apprehended in 2021, but that was about 5 years after Lois Duncan had passed away. So she never got to write the sequel that she really wanted to write, which was going to be a sense of closure and getting answers and finally understanding what and why it really happened. Okay, so back to the movie. This is one of those fascinating TV horror films. It feels both intimate and a little bit unsettling. It's a story laced with witchcraft and paranoia, not unlike Midnight Offerings, as a matter of fact, in a lot of ways. That video, by the way, for Midnight Offerings will be linked at the end of this one if you happen to miss it. Stranger in Our House aired on NBC on Halloween night. It was Wes Craven's first television project after making waves with The Last House on the Left, and it hints at many of the themes he would later go on to refine in A Nightmare on Elm Street, such as, for example, you've got a protagonist that senses the danger, but no one else believes her, not unlike Nancy, who's convinced that Freddy Krueger is real, even when everyone else claims it's just nightmares and or sleep deprivation. You also have what should be your safe spot, your home, being violated by supernatural entities in both films. Feels like Craven is very much testing the waters here, even in a constrained made-for-TV format, where he can toy with isolated teens, untrustworthy adults, and everyday life influenced by the supernatural, because that certainly is true in both this film and in A Nightmare on Elm Street. The movie stars Linda Blair, who will, of course, forever be linked to the character of Regan MacNeil from The Exorcist. Here she's playing Rachel Bryant, typical American teenager living in an almost sort of idyllic life on a farm in Northern California. Her world changes when her cousin Julia, who's played by Lee Purcell, comes to live with the family after a tragedy where her parents are killed. And at first, Julia seems like the perfect house guest. She's polite, she's reserved, she's eager to fit in, but Rachel soon notices some odd, unsettling occurrences. Rachel's mother, two brothers, and father all seem sort of unaware that Julia's behavior is unusual, and this results in Rachel acting out. There's a lot of strained relationships, shifting loyalties, and a sort of supernatural influence that Julia seems to have over everyone around her. I think the strength of this story lies in the slow build of paranoia. Is Rachel just acting out of jealousy? Is she blowing everything out of proportion? Or is Julia somehow actually using some sort of dark forces to manipulate the family? And Wes Craven does a nice job. He toys with that ambiguity throughout the film. And so you've got sort of that natural teenage rivalry, but with undertones of witchcraft. The supporting cast is equally strong. You have Carol Lawrence, who was a TV and stage actress. She originated the role of Maria in Broadway's West Side Story. She plays Rachel's mother. Jeremy Slade portrays Rachel's loving but increasingly just sort of oblivious dad, while Jeff East plays one of Rachel's brothers. He's just caught up in the middle of all the family tension. Jeff East also played the teenage Clark Kent in the 1978 Richard Donner film Superman, and he was also in the 1988 horror film Pumpkinhead, in case he looked really familiar. Fran Drescher from The Nanny fame, she also has a very small part here. All of their grounded performances really help sell the horror here, giving these like supernatural elements a very believable backdrop. Stylistically, yeah, this is going to be unmistakably from the 1970s. You've much softer in violence than Craven's theatrical work. Remember, Wes Craven had released Last House on the Left in 1972, which was a brutal film, as was another Wes Craven film, The Hills Have Eyes, in 1977. But the confines of TV meant he had to rely less on graphic violence and much more on atmosphere. From the pastoral setting of the Bryant household to Julia's darkly magnetic presence, the film generates an air of dread without really ever needing to rely on gore. Instead, it leans much more into psychological tension, the fear of just not being believed, and the horror of watching your world change and shift in ways that people around you don't seem to be aware of. While it may not be as widely discussed as Craven's later film, Stranger in Our House is a pretty fascinating piece of his career, and it's a solid entry in the made-for-TV horror canon as well. Just like I discussed with Midnight Offerings, it's part teenage drama, part occult thriller. It's all wrapped up in that nostalgic 1970s TV atmosphere. For fans of Linda Blair or just sort of vintage supernatural thrillers, then I think that this one is ripe for rediscovery. And Lee Purcell is very good in this role too. Now, I know nothing about her. For all I know, this could have been an incredibly difficult shoot for her. There could have been personal issues going on in her life that we aren't aware of. But that doesn't seem to matter because she looks like she's having an absolute blast with this character. I hope that that's true because she's chewing scenery left and right, especially toward the end. She really seems to relish this character's just out loud, maniacal, evil manipulation. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you might notice some similarities to this movie with the film The Babysitter that I talked about in another episode from 1981, starring Stephanie Zimbalist. But a lot of people, especially people online, have noted that the plot of this movie very similar to another movie called The Kiss from 1988. So I think certainly Craven's film might have inspired other filmmakers, or maybe just the idea of a dangerous woman setting up house and sort of manipulating and seducing all of the people around her. Maybe that just had not become so much of a trope as we saw in the 80s and 90s, and this is one of the earlier incarnations of that. Not many scares in this one. It almost leans into camp a few times. Some people will find it super dull and boring because not much happens for a while. You also have Linda Blair's sort of whiny outburst, and I don't mean that as a negative. It's absolutely valid for the character who her life has been somewhat insulated and cushy, and to suddenly have all of that disrupted, and for no one to believe all of the concerns that she's trying to voice seems perfectly valid. And then when it gets into the supernatural territory of this, it really starts to add some low-budget thrills. I guess I'm saying it's a cozy little thriller. It's best for a long weekend with nothing much going on, and you need some witchcraft, or you need Linda Blair sporting a massive teased-out hairdo just to get you through. So, I didn't really mean for us to get caught up in a multi-week string of witchcraft made-for-TV movies, but here we are. So we might as well go for broke. Let's go just a little bit farther back to 1970, and I'll talk about Crowhaven Farm and do a review of that one next time. Until then, everybody, stay curious and stay scared.